Welcome to video 1 of our 3-part video series in which we talk about some of our major aftermarket upgrades. We're going to provide details for each of those upgrades. We're going to talk about what we like and what we don't like about those upgrades. We're going to talk about what we would do differently, especially after 3.5 years with some of those upgrades. And finally, we're going to do a cost-benefit ranking of each of those upgrades, one by Jim and one by me for comparison purposes. And that'll give you an idea of what we think are the most important things that you need to add to your boat. So let me give you a little feel for where we were coming from when we were choosing our aftermarket options. We knew that we were going to be sailing up in the Chesapeake for about 1.5 years, and then our plan was to go down to the Bahamas. We did not know if we were going to go back down to Florida before we went to the Bahamas, so we knew that we had to pick some of our options that we weren't really going to use in the Chesapeake, but we would be using in the Bahamas. So we had a lot of upgrades that we were considering, and knowing what we were going to do for that first 2 years, we set kind of a cutoff point. And anything that fell below that cutoff point, we were just going to wait and see how living on the boat was without those options. And it's interesting because after living on the boat for about 2 years, we realized some of those options were not important to us at all. So we just crossed them off the list entirely. So that's one thing that I encourage people to do, is if it's an option you're kind of on the fence about, live on the boat for a while and see if you can do without. One of the problems with getting some upgrades is they actually require upkeep. So if you find you can live without it, especially if it requires you to upkeep that item, it may not be worth it for you. So as I mentioned, this is video 1 of a 3-part video series, starting alphabetically. So let's get started.
One of the aftermarket additions that I think are must-haves for almost any vessel, but definitely for catamarans, is aft spotlights. You can see above my head right here is one of the 2 spotlights that we have over our transoms. They are absolutely spectacular. They rotate and can move around just by reaching up and turning them. They're very bright LEDs. So you can see that they look down on the transom. So any boaters getting in and out of their dinghy to our vessel, including ourselves, we use them at night all the time. Keeps everything clear. Nobody can accidentally fall overboard due to lack of seeing in the dark. They turn around, can spot into the back of the aft cockpit if we need extra light, or even down over the grill. Something that I didn't realize that I liked about them was that they actually come in 2 colors, white and blue. The blue is definitely a bling value, but it also is quite useful when you're coming back in your dinghy at night and you're in an anchorage with 20 boats and you're trying to figure out which one of the 20 boats is yours. As you approach with your dinghy, seeing the 1 or 2 vessels that actually have blue lights helps you narrow down where your vessel is. And these blue lights also can shine down into the water to some degree at night. Blue light goes through salt water clearer than any other light, including white light, believe it or not. And so they also can help show the wildlife in the water. Once we receive the boat and we're getting our first wave of aftermarket options all through Just Cats, we wanted to put those aft spotlights with both white and the blue lights on over the transoms. When we did that, we needed to have a new switch put in. These 2 panels, this 3-gang and this 3-gang, came with the vessel, and we needed to put 1 more of these switches in. I suggested to Just Cats that if they were going to have to put 1 in here, to just go ahead and put a 3-gang in. And what we were able to do then is have just the 1 switch, this one right here particularly, for our aft spotlights. So the blue lights add the bling, makes your boat a little bit more unique. As we've sailed more and more, we've seen more and more vessels add different blue accents to their vessels to give it a unique feature, add a little bit of a bling. And when I went to fix strip lights at our forward cockpit, due to the wires pulling out, I realized it left me the opportunity to actually add some blue lights to our eyebrows of our boat. I've seen 1, maybe 2 other leopards that did a small blue eyebrow effect. And when I went to fix our lighting strip that came with the boat in our forward cockpit, it was pretty easy for me to just piggyback on that same circuit a blue light strip that I actually put along our side windows, or the leopard eyes, and the lighting is up above the eyes, so I call it the leopard eyebrow effect. I think it's unique, but it's also something that's fairly low key. It's not real bright, but it adds another level of uniqueness to the boat. And it was a fun little project that I did. Sammy made a really good point, and I think it's worthwhile pointing out. What we were able to do is have just the one switch, this one right here particularly, for our aft spotlights. And then we had the two dummy switches left here. We've since then put underwater lights in, and so this switch right here is for our underwater lights. One of the things that we could have done that would have even been more helpful is when we put this last 3-gang in 3 years ago, just for this one switch, we probably should have just gone ahead and bought the switches instead of just having the blanks put in, and had all 3 of these with switches added into them, so that when we were ready to use them, the switches and the electronics were already put in, and we just added the wiring and went forward. When we put in our underwater lights, we were up in the Chesapeake, and though we had the blank here, we had to run down and figure out how we were going to get all the proper switching and transformer behind the panel here for the underwater lights, which took a little bit of extra time and money. And frankly, at the time that we put these in, we should have just gone ahead and spent the additional money to have the electronics behind this switch added, and it would have been a simpler addition later on. The blue lighting effect, I've seen a number of other ways of adding that bling to people's boats. The one that I particularly like that we have not done and will not do, because having 2 blue lights already is enough for us, would be to go up to the spreaders and put blue lights pointing down toward the boat. And some people even go up to the first spreaders and put blue lights pointing up for the rest of the mast. So what it does is when you turn those lights on, the entire mast turns blue. There's a blue aura that kind of shines over the entire top of the vessel. It's a very unique, good look. Not something that I wanted to do to climb up and wire all the way up to the mast and the spreaders. My project was a little easier and a little less hassle.
For the spotlights, both Jim and I ranked this upgrade pretty high because it's an item we use frequently, and these spotlights make it much safer to get on and off the boat at night.
So we're here in the aft cockpit. The aft cockpit, in my mind, is your back porch to your house. It is here for a breeze. It is here for beautiful views. So one of the major discussion points with the aft cockpit is protection from the elements. There are basically 2 ways at which you can protect yourself from the elements. One, you can put in from floor to ceiling strata-glass, which is what I would consider semi-permanent, if not permanent, where you have a clear plastic product that goes from here all the way up to the top. It's nice. It turns this not from an indoor-outdoor room, but mainly into an indoor area. In my humble opinion, it's great in cold areas. Warm areas, I'll get into that later. The second way you can protect yourself from the elements is what we have back here, and that is a mesh material that's really nothing more than a sunshade. It rolls up and fits in this channel. This channel was built by the manufacturer of the boat so that this sun protection material can roll up and easily just snap up in there and go away. We chose a dark color mesh that matched our cushions, doesn't show a lot of dirt or any other type of mold or mildew. We actually chose this mesh material aftermarket, looking at vessels before we purchased the boat that got the original manufacturer's shading product versus the ones you can buy aftermarket. We felt that this was a much nicer material, and it allowed us to pick the material that matched the rest of the decor of our boat. And we are able to also choose the density of the mesh that we used. You don't think of it as a big issue, but the density of the mesh allows you to be able to see through, at the same time protect yourself from the sun. And there is that optimal solution, and we went through a number of different mesh materials and densities to come up with one we felt that worked really well for us. And it is connected by 3 bungee cords on this side, and the bungee cords just attached to the stanchions. It's really easy to deploy. It's very easy to put away. One person can do it on their own. And what's really nice about it is when the sun is low on the horizon, you get a double whammy effect with sun. You get not just the sun coming in, but you also get the sun reflecting off the water. This material is very good at knocking much of that sun down. The aft cockpit is surrounded with 3 sides of open exposure, and we have this sunshade material on all three sides. You can deploy any of the three sides depending on where the sun is. The aft side is split up into 3 panels, which can be zippered together or zippered apart. We deploy usually all 3 zippered up, and we will unzipper it when it's time to grill, because one section of that can be zippered up and you can roll it up, do your grilling, and keep the other part deployed, which is much easier for everybody out in the aft cockpit that's trying to stay away from the sun and the reflections, but you're still able to grill. We chose not to put any type of semi-permanent barriers on the outsides here. Some people will put a strata-glass material, which turns this into more of a greenhouse than it does a back porch. Having strata-glass and the deployment of that and all the materials and fixtures to hold it in place, it makes this space feel very closed in. And even more importantly, because we're usually in the lower latitudes, we are usually always in the warm areas, and you want, especially back here, to have some breeze through here. The aft cockpit, believe it or not, actually gets less breeze than actually even being in our salon. In our salon, we're able to open the door and get a good deal of air pushing through. Here, you're really getting only air that comes around the sides of the boat when it does come around the side of the boat. A lot of it just blows right by because this space is downwind because the boat's always pointing into the wind. Having no strata-glass, having these shades have really ended up being the sweet spot for how we like to use the aft cockpit. And second of all, it allows us to be able to deploy and put away this sunshade material very quickly. There's one aspect to the shades that anybody who's considering purchasing them needs to remember, and that is that the triangles created in the corners will not be closed. There's probably a way of paying somebody to create a triangular closure to that. I've not seen anybody do it, but what that means is there are angles for which the boat will turn that you will still get the sun in the aft cockpit. And there's not many angles to it, but it is not a complete closed system.
Jim and I both rank the cockpit sunshades as one of the lower items in terms of cost to benefit importance. While they're nice to have, we only use them a few times a week.
One of my must-haves when we got the boat was replacing the table in the aft cockpit. The aft cockpit was not only this big, but another, say, 12 inches out here, and it was huge, and it did not fold up. So when you tried to get into sit anywhere around this wonderful big seating area, you had to start going like this, and you had to crab over all the way to sit down, and that was just a non-starter for me. So you can see that when this table is folded up, you can just walk right in, sit anywhere you want. There's still a nice table that you can put a drink on or anything else you need, and you'll really only need this table to open all the way up when it's time for dinner or lunch or breakfast, whenever you're going to say eat here or possibly maybe work on your computer. We took this massive table. It was a fiberglass table. It looked beautiful. It was white, just as white as everything else on the vessel. We took it off. We kept the pedestals used to hold it up, and I actually found online these teak tables, and we bought 2 teak tables and attached them together with runners underneath and created this one smaller table. The fact is for us, we're on the boat, just the two of us, 95% of the time. Maybe 2 to 5% of the time we may have somebody over for drinks or something like that, and we'll sit in the back. We'll open up the table, and we can have easily 6 or 8 people around this table. But other than those times where we're eating in the back, we just keep it all closed off. We found that probably 30 Leopard 45 owners, some type of variation of these teak tables on their vessel now, because nobody likes that table. It's actually easier to crawl up and walk along the cushions to go sit down than it is to actually get inside and sit down. So a lot of people are putting these on. It's been really nice. What I like about the one that we put on is we used 2 small standard tables that I connected. And one of the negatives that you have to worry about with these tables is these struts, these little wooden rests that you pull out to use to basically give some backing to this. If you buy a long one of these, you only get these 2 struts for a big long portion. So when people are eating, they like to kind of rest their arms down And if you only have 2 struts for this entire side, it's actually quite loose. And you need to have more of these struts. So having 2 tables we put together, we end up having 4 struts on either side, which adds a lot of rigidity to these. 2 years ago when I put this in, we did a video on how I united these standard small tables together to make one table such that it could fit on these pedestals. Honestly, if I was to get exactly what I wanted up front, it would not have been a teak table. A lot of people love the teak table. If I got what I wanted, I would have had a fiberglass table that folds exactly like we have, and it would have matched the rest of the boat, and I would have had to do very little engineering, and I would have put it in and it would have worked. That was not the case, and I could not find it anywhere. And frankly, if I was to have a craft person who knows fiberglass really well to make something like that, it would have cost $5,000, I'm sure. And there was no way for the benefits that we were going to get out of that table that I was going to spend anything close to that. When you pull the arms out and fold out the leaves, those arms are pretty strong. But if you have somebody that's picking themselves up and down off the table itself, those wooden arms will not do well with that much force. So if you have someone who's not thinking, or you're having kids that just don't think about those type of leverage points, you are playing with a little bit of fire. The time to worry about those leaves is when you open them up and there's a lot of people moving around and they can put a lot of extra weight on it, and potentially the supports for the leaves could break. Another hassle is you just have to keep the table oiled at all times. If you don't keep it oiled, the wood will start to tarnish, and that tarnish will need to be bleached out, which basically then means scrubbing away all the oils and getting down to bare wood again so that you can oil the teak again, and that's not an easy thing. One hassle with the teak table is staying vigilant and oiling it consistently and keeping the full grain of the wood oiled up so that we don't see any wood aging.
Jim really likes the cockpit table and ranked it very high, probably because this is one of his favorite places to sit. I give it a moderate ranking because while the table is much easier to get in and out of than the factory table, I only use it once a day at most.
So another aftermarket option that we went with that we could have got from the factory, but we went with the aftermarket option, was our cushions. And 3 years ago when we were looking at the cushions on the boats weren't that nice, but the cushions now are much nicer. But even looking at the nicer cushions now, we still would have went with an aftermarket option. One of the reasons is because we get to choose the color. We choose this dark gray color. We were thinking it wouldn't show dirt as well. And not only is it a dark gray color, but it also has a variation in the actual material itself. So our idea was it's not going to show the dirt or salt very much, and it was going to be really easy to take care of. And we've had these for 3 years and they still look great. Another thing that was really nice is we got to choose the actual thickness of the cushion itself, and we went with a really hard material, and it's lasted really well. No dips or bends or anything. It's wonderful still. And probably the biggest selling point after talking to the individual who manufactured these is that, as you see here, to make sure you can see this, the majority of the back of this material is a mesh material. And this is the actual fabric, which is this umbrella material, but the actual back is mainly this mesh material. And the great thing about this mesh material, and the fact that it's mainly this mesh material, is that it's really quick to dry. And we found that these dry much faster than some of the other cushions that we have that don't have this huge area with this mesh material. So talking about washing and cleaning these, they're really easy to wash and clean as well. We wash them probably twice a year with just soap and water and a light brush. And then we let them set out in the sun for about 2 days, and they come back nice and dry, and they're still really good, as you can see. No mold and mildew after 3 years, which is great. So I'm going to show you some clips now of our cushions in our front and our back cockpit areas. And one thing you may notice as you're looking at those cushions is that we don't have any back cushions. So why do we not have back cushions? We explain in the video link above why we don't have back cushions, so I'll leave that to you if you're interested. So we really like our cushions and the fact that we're able to pick our own colors and pick our own designs, but one thing I've considered doing differently was to put up some Strata-glass here. One of the problems you have with these cushions, and any cushions in general, is that when it rains, you have to gather them all up and put them in a big pile, otherwise they get rained on. Now, it's not a big deal if they get rained on, they just stay wet for a good half day or so until they dry out, but you don't really want to sit on them because they're a little wet. So what I would like, and I actually haven't seen, is these big Strata-glass panels with a big, huge U-zip. Because one thing that would be nice back here is to be able to roll up this big U-zip panel, snap it up in a couple times, and then have all this nice airflow through here and be able to see whatever you wanted, so you wouldn't be obstructed as much as the Strata-glass usually does. And then when it rained, and this is what I'd like about it, you just roll down the Strata-glass panel and zip it up. You could leave the cushions here and wouldn't have to do any movement, and they wouldn't get wet. So that's one thing I would change.
Both Jim and I really like the Aftermarket cushions and gave them a mid to above mid ranking. We use this almost every day, and after 3.5 years, they still look great and are relatively easy to care for.
One of our biggest additions early on was our dinghy. In cruiser terms, that is like your automobile because you use it to get around everywhere. We chose to try to maximize a dinghy for the space behind our vessel. We have an excellent davit system that basically raises the dinghy up. A davit system is in effect your garaging of your dinghy. Our davit system that Leopard makes is really a great design. It's mechanical, it's push button. We attach our dinghy with a rigging system that allows the dinghy to hang in 2 different positions. A very high position for long-term sailing. If you happen to get into extremely rough seas, one of the things that people worry about is the seas actually dumping into the dinghy while it's hung up, and all that extra weight cannot be supported, and the dinghy will fall off your vessel, turn itself into an anchor potentially for your vessel, a very dangerous thing. So our rigging system allows the dinghy to be as high up out of the water as possible. So we have a second stage for our rigging system that keeps it lower. It attaches between eyelets that are welded into the bottom of the dinghy and goes all the way up to our davit system, and then our davit system basically cantilevers up and brings the dinghy up out of the water and against our vessel. Because of that davit system and how our solar panel array has poles on either side of the davit system, and also how far apart our transoms are, only allows a certain size dinghy. And with all of those issues, we found that a 11.5-foot dinghy was pretty much the maximum length of dinghy that we could put into the system. There's also one other limitation with the davit system, and that is weight. The davit system on Leopard 45, it has a maximum capacity of 450 pounds. That's a 450-pound dinghy, the engine, the fuel tank and fuel, all additional items that you put and leave in your dinghy, things like a starter battery, things like an anchor, things like an anchor chain. All those things have to add up to something less than 450 pounds, or you need to be taking that in and out of your dinghy every time you want to raise it. We are probably in the 320 to 350 pound total range, I believe, for our dinghy, maybe a little higher than that, so we're far away from the 450 pound maximum. All of those 3 components, the weight, where it sits in the water, and then how it sits once it's raised, we found a 11.5-foot dinghy was pretty much the maximum width we could go. And because of the weight issues, a pure fiberglass dinghy will not work. They are way too heavy. You need to go with an aluminum dinghy, and most aluminum dinghies that are good, lightweight, and structurally really strong are called rib dinghies. We went with a 11.5-foot AB dinghy. It's called Lamina. It's a very good dinghy for us. One of the caveats that was very important for us is we have 16 legs that need to be in a dinghy. 3 dogs times 4 legs plus 2 humans. We looked at probably 6 or 7 different dinghy manufacturers, and we found that the AB, when it came to absolute maximum square footage for where your legs were going to be, the AB edged out everybody else by a square foot or so. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you look at the square footage inside an 11-foot dinghy, it's still considerable, and we've been very happy with it. It's structurally very, very sound boat. It's made with Hyphalon. It's light. It's not so light that it acts like a wing. When you're buying a dinghy, there is a trade-off that you need to consider. The weight of the dinghy can be a very big trade-off. The heavier the dinghy gets, if your engine isn't sized enough, it will labor through the water and not really go very well. On one side, if it's way too heavy. On the other side, a very, very light dinghy will end up acting like a wing and will actually, as it's riding through the waves, if it's too light, it will actually do a wheelie and you'll catch a lot of air before coming down again. And so you can't go very fast with a light dinghy either. You need that sweet spot in the middle. And we found that the 11-foot AB with a 25 Yamaha horsepower engine has been absolutely a sweet spot for us. I'm sure there's other arrangements that will work, but that combination has been absolutely ripping for us. Once you have come up with the weight and length and other basics of your dinghy to work within, then there are a number of options or accessories that you need to consider. The first and foremost in my mind that anyone should be looking at is the bow locker. That is basically the trunk of your dinghy. And the reason why it's important is, in many cases, it houses where your gasoline tank is, which is a 6-gallon gasoline tank. But then you want a lot of space in between it, because there are a lot of little items, just like if you go back and look in the back of your trunk of your car, a lot of items that a lot of people put in their car and just leave there. And the same idea fits for your dinghy. And that trunk also operates as a step, so when you get into the dinghy from your transom, it's really just a lateral move over to the dinghy, and then once you're in the dinghy you can step off the trunk into the dinghy itself. After the trunk, going back, we also have a non-skid flooring that came with the dinghy. After your bow locker, the next thing I think that most people like to start thinking about is how are we going to set up the seating situation in the dinghy. With us and our 16 legs, the space in our vessel is paramount. And so we went with a simple bench in the aft of our dinghy, just in front of the tiller of our outboard. And that simple bench allows us to store things underneath. And it's also underneath our bench is where we put our life preservers. The other side of not having a simple bench is having an elaborate console and seating and extra more storage, and any of those items in our mind was a lot of extra weight, and also taking away from the space for our 16 legs. And between the extra weight and taking up all the room, those were absolutely a no-go. And then behind the bench, we did go with a starter kit and starter battery for our dinghy, which Stephanie put her foot down and made a requirement. I was kind of rolling my eyes, kind of, okay, that's what you want, we'll get. But in the end, she was absolutely spot on. After having the starter for like 2 months, I realized it was wonderful. You just turn around, press the button, get it going. One of the things I was worried about was the battery and salt water and all that. Would it really hold its own? We've had that same battery and starter for 3 years. It has worked like clockwork. Other items that we had done aftermarket to our dinghy was we have a front forward cleat added. It's basically a step and cleat and light at the forward bow of our vessel. So we, using our starter battery, we also have the ability to have our red and green light, which is requirement in the United States for all dinghies to show red and green navigational lights in the front of the dinghy at all times in the dark. And so ours is built into the step. It has a cleat with it, so we are able to cleat off our anchor at any time on that step, on that lighting area, and it's directly wired into the battery, so that works. Also required by navigational standards is a running light that is supposed to be on the aft quarter of your dinghy. And we have one that is a folding pole because it needs to be above everybody's head. So you don't leave it out. It will actually unfold, snap together, and then snap into a holding pin that has the wiring, and it'll light up immediately. We do use that, though there's some hassle to take it out of the trunk and then put it in the back. There are two things that come to mind for changes that I would do with our dinghy system if we were able to. Number one is you need paddles as a backup for your dinghy. Our paddles are not situated where we can use them to row. And if I did it again, or maybe in the future, I would actually buy paddles and the hyphalon attachment for the pegs that hold the oars, and I would put those on our vessel. One of the nice things about some of these oar systems is you can then store the oars on the outer upper section of the dinghy, and it takes the oars completely out of your space inside the dinghy, and it keeps them outside and stowed away until you need them. That's one thing I wish I had done. And the second item that Stephanie and I wish we had, because we see some friends that have it, is actually have a hydraulic lifting system for our outboard engine. Our gas outboard engine is tiltable, and it is not so bad that you can't get it up, but under certain conditions it's just a hassle and it can be somewhat of a struggle. And we've seen people with the hydraulic system, you just raise and lower. The reason why we don't have it is because it's not an add-on to the engine. When you buy an outboard, you have to say right up front, at least with Yamahas, do I want the hydraulic lifting system? And they actually build a model of the 25 horsepower with the hydraulic lifting system all engineered into it. And we bought the model that does not have that, and you can't do that aftermarket. We'd have to sell our engine and then go and buy a brand new engine, and that has not been worth all the hassle for me just continuing to tilt it manually.
Jim and I both ranked our dinghy as one of the most important aftermarket items. You use a dinghy a lot, so make sure you research your options thoroughly and make sure you consider all the items you're going to be putting into your dinghy, for example, snorkel and scuba gear, to make sure you have enough leg room.
So if you follow me back, what you'll see is our closet, and then what you'll see is drawers, drawers, and more drawers. So we have a ton of storage space down here. And what this used to be, instead of these 6 drawers right here, what this used to be was a table. And let me just tell you one thing about catamarans. The good thing about catamarans is that you don't need a table down here. You don't need a couch down here. You're not going to be down here very often because you have so much wonderful seating space up in your salon and outside. You're not going to want to come down in your halls and do any writing or anything. You're going to do it upstairs. So convert it to storage space. Because what you're always looking for, no matter how big your boat is you're always looking for more storage space. So let me tell you a little bit about these drawers. As I said, this used to be a table. So they took out the table and they were able to put these drawers out. And we got this done at Just Catamarans. And fortunately at Just Catamarans, they're able to obtain the same wood grain trim that they use originally at Leopard. So it fits in perfectly. They're also able to use the same knobs. As you can also see, these drawers are pretty big. So we have a lot of storage space. This is one drawer and the second drawer. And then as you can see, the third drawer is a little bit smaller, but it still gives you a decent amount of space. So it's definitely worth it. So Just Cats was also able to use the top that was on the table in making this set of drawers. And as you can see, this table opens, and in here we have a lot of storage space, so that's really nice. We didn't want to lose all that nice storage space. And this one actually has a mirror even, and this one has some drawers that are actually built in, so it's really nice. We didn't want to lose that. So this is a great amount of storage space. When we moved the table, we also had to move a number of other things that were kind of part of the table. So we moved them up, and now they're above where the drawers are. That being the USB port, the power outlet, the switch, which we've now converted to an empty switch, and the light. And we moved all of that up and had holes drilled in as necessary to have this put in. So you're going to need a place to store your vacuum cleaner. And what we had done, which I really like, is we put a power outlet in our closet, which allows us to store all of our vacuum cleaner and vacuum cleaner attachments in our closet. And we don't have any lines, we don't have any wires hanging out or anything from our closet or wherever we're storing it, and nobody sees it.
So let me open the closet and I'll show you where we keep our vacuum cleaner and the power strip. Power strip we put way down here on the bottom. And it's really handy because it allows us to keep all of our vacuum and accessories. We really like this, where we can keep all of our vacuum stuff out of sight. So make sure you get this power outlet put in here because it is so handy. So one thing that we would have done differently is when we got this table unit moved up, we had a light switch for this light above here, which was separate from our main light switch. And we just moved it up thinking that made sense. About a half a year ago, we actually needed another switch that was usable. So we transferred this one upstairs and we put a dummy switch in here. And looking back in hindsight, what we originally should have done is we should have not drilled this hole in this wall or put this switch here. What we should have done is taken the wiring from this light and transferred it over to our main switch. So if you have any situation like that where you have to move a switch, think about moving the wiring rather than putting that switch in. I really like the additional storage offered by the drawers and use them almost every day. Both of us gave the drawers a moderate ranking because even though I'm using these, he realizes he'd have a lot less of the factory drawers to use if we hadn't added these.
At the time that we were choosing our options during the purchase process, I elected not to take the option for radar and the option for AIS. I did intend to put both of them on, but I chose not to use the standard options because the options that were being offered were old options, and the manufacturer, in this case Raymarine, had come out with the new AIS equipment and new state-of-the-art radar, and it was a large advancement. And at the time, Leopard was not offering it, and it's not unheard of for any of the manufacturers to not offer the most up-to-date hardware. And if you think about it, it can make sense. When they go and purchase hardware, they have the same standard equipment for all boats for years. So they make it bulletproof, they know how it all fits together, and once they have it running, they don't like to change out one component at a time and possibly mess up how they all integrate together. So we had Just Catamarans put in our radar and our AIS, and for them it's very easy. They've put those things in numerous times with other vessels that also elected not to take those older models and to use more updated models. Once they're put in with the NEMA 2000 backbone, which is the communication system amongst all the different components for navigation, they worked very well. They worked absolutely perfect. No, I think we had one or two things that we had to tune up after they were put in, but we now have, instead of like 8-year-old technology, we only have like 2-year-old technology. And in radar, that was quite a significant difference in performance. And on top of it, it used something like 1/4 the amount of power while the radar was running, and it was much clearer. So not only did it perform more, it had very small, almost sipping of electricity. The final electronic piece that we added to our navigational system was a Samsung tablet. Without the tablet, the only way we can actually function at managing all of our electronics is to go up to the helm and look at our multifunctional display unit, which is an MFD, which is a special name for a computer screen that shows all of the navigational information. And so at any time, day and night, when you are managing the vessel, you would always have to be up at the helm. For long sails, that doesn't really work very well. And also there's additional information that you can get off the internet that does not display on that MFD unit. And by having a tablet, we can have that new software that we would like to use and mount this tablet up at the helm, or we can take the tablet down here into the salon and emulate what's on the MFD screen directly onto the tablet screen. What that allows us to do is sit here with the protection and the comfort of the settee and the salon area and see exactly what's going on with all of our electronics, with our navigation, and be able to helm the entire boat by sitting on the couch. And it works very, very well. We end up using 2 tablets to do it because we not only want to emulate what's on the screen, but we have additional internet software that we use to navigate that does not work directly with Raymarine's equipment. And we can use both of them side by side down here in the salon, or again taking one of the tablets up to the helm. The second tablet we have is an Apple. There's some unique features that work a little better with the Raymarine software through an Apple platform versus an Android platform. The tablet that we got was basically a hand-me-down, and it's worked pretty well. But I think I probably would have invested in a more modern tablet so that it worked just a little better. Every once in a while, this old tablet gets a little wonky, and it'd be worthwhile having something a little more stable. For us, it's not worth spending that much extra money to buy a newer Apple tablet just because we're not Apple users. Finally, we also put in one last electronics, which if I was to do it again, I would not put it in. There's a remote that works with the autopilot, so you can walk all around the boat and change your autopilot settings so you can change the direction of the boat. It's a little gimmicky. It's a small enough boat that we can get around to changing things when we need. We hardly ever use it. It's a little slow at changing the direction of the boat versus doing it by hand at the helm. And so we have it. We're not going to rip it out, but the remote autopilot handheld unit was a bust for us.
Jim and I both ranked the electronics upgrades as one of the most important aftermarket upgrades. Make sure that you're installing the newest equipment available, with the caveat that you also have to make sure that all of your electronics work well together.
So I hope you've enjoyed this first video of our 3-part video series. If you've enjoyed it, make sure to hit the like button and also subscribe and hit the notification bell, because we've got 2 more videos coming up that I think you'll want to watch if you enjoyed this one.